Toyota is doing some wacky things right now. They just made a patent for a manual transmission in an electric car, except it's not actually a transmission. It's a pretend transmission. Bizarre. Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Electric Viking. My name is Sam Evans and I'm coming to you here from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to all the new subscribers. Welcome back to everyone else. For those of you who are curious about my background, one of the things I did a number of years ago was start an online e-commerce company with some other cycling enthusiasts. So that's the reason for the cycling books up here. I'm a bit of or used to be, a bike racer. So I did a lot of road racing, triathlons, and even did a few mountain bike races. One of those was called the Otway Odyssey. It was a 100-kilometer mountain bike race where I probably crashed 50 times in the mud. It was total torture. But I recently bought an e-bike. It's a Merida E160. And I just took it out last weekend. I rode from Lake Mountain. That's a big mountain here in Victoria. Well, it's not big compared to your mountains in Europe or in North America, but for us, it's a pretty big. And rode down that mountain. There was a fair bit of climbing involved as well. And boy, e-bikes are a lot of fun, I've got to say. I highly recommend them. And I can really see why people love them. This has nothing to do with whatsoever with Toyota. But I just wanted to give you some context on why the cycling books. As you know as well, my two boys, Jack and Kel, they love to ride and race their BMXs. I'll put a link in the description below to their channel if you want to check them out. You can see some of their adventures and what they get up to. So Toyota has just patented a plan for an EV with a manual transmission and a clutch, but it's a pretend clutch. So it's kind of like a video game. I really don't understand why the need to patent it. I mean, initially when I read this, I was like, oh, so Toyota are patenting having a manual transmission in an EV. Great. So no one else can have a manual transmission in an EV. And then I thought, why would you even want to? How is this possibly beneficial? But anyway, here's what's actually happened. The patent appears to show an EV that you can change gears in, but you can also set it to gearless mode as well. In other words, it actually doesn't have a transmission at all. It's just a pretend transmission. I don't know how you can patent something that's a pretend transmission, but that's what they've actually done. So get this is the story. Several automakers experimented with equipping vehicles with multi-gear transmission, but none made it to production except for two that are currently on sale, the Porsche Taycan and the Audi e-tron GT. But both of those only have two gears. It appears as though Toyota is also exploring the possibility, but it would be for a lot more than 2 gears. We're looking at 6 to 8 speeds in their virtual transmission, as was revealed by patents recently filed by the company. It looks like Toyota wants to implement a solution that, to me, doesn't seem dissimilar to what you get when you convert an ICE vehicle to an electric vehicle, but you keep the gearbox. In these conversions, people keep the gearbox, but they don't actually use it. They actually just usually stick the transmission in one gear, like fourth or something, because the reality is there's no need for a transmission. So in other words, they just can't be bothered removing the transmission, and it's unnecessary to actually remove it. So they leave it there. But people don't actually use the transmissions though in these cars. So Toyota's patent drawings and diagrams may appear a bit daunting and complicated to understand, but the really simple version of what the manufacturer seems to want to do is that they want to have a virtually pretend transmission that relies on a special controller that alters the torque of the electric motor in order to make it seem more gas car-like. So in other words, basically, they're taking something that works really well, trying to make it more complicated. Yeah. It seems to mention a real clutch pedal that the drivers will press in order to change gears by moving a physical shifter. Although the text refers to these as a pseudo shifter and a pseudo clutch pedal, hinting at the fact that they're not essential and that their role is to reproduce the feeling and the fun of a manual transmission in a vehicle that doesn't actually need it. Here's what one of the patents says. The controller of the electric vehicle is configured to control the torque of the electric motor using the MT vehicle model based on the operation amount of the accelerator pedal, the operation amount of the pseudo clutch pedal, and the shift position of the pseudo shifter used by the operation of the reaction force actuator. They seem to be adding quite a bit of complexity into this vehicle. The controller is configured to store shift reaction force characteristics, simulating the characteristic of the shift reaction force according to the operation of the shifter. Then the controller is reconfigured to control the shift reaction force output by the shift reaction force generator according to the operation of the pseudo shifter using the stored shift reaction force characteristic. It was hard just to read that. Wow, what a mouthful of jargon. It reminds me a little bit of Back to the Future or something like that. Anyway, trying to decipher the contrived and bizarre wording which just repeats itself over and over, it sounds like the so-called pseudo shifter will even physically move, just like it does in, say, a manual car, say a Mazda Miata or a Mazda MX-5, where every part of the accelerator makes the shifter move and react differently, adding potentially fun to the car's character. So this makes it look like Toyota want to use this pseudo manual in a future sporty offering or future sporty EVs. Maybe the GT86 or something like that will have this manual, this pretend manual transmission in it. Now, apparently the company's president, Akio Toyoda, is an enthusiast and is a keen driver and has vowed to add more exciting models to Toyota's lineup. The funny thing about all this is, right, the actual clutch pedal, it's just there for show. You can push it in if you want, but it actually doesn't do anything. I'm not really sure if that would work. I mean, why push the clutch in if you don't need to? If you think about it, apparently some of the best drivers can shift in a manual transmission car without using the clutch at all. They just know where that shift point is, where the pressure releases. I mean, I've never been that good of a driver to be able to do that, and I never wanted to wreck my transmission by trying to make it work, but I've heard that's what they do. But in this vehicle, if the clutch doesn't actually do anything, what's the actual point of it? I can't understand. The other question I have is, realistically, most of the world doesn't buy manual transmissions yet. I know there's those of you who say, oh, but in Europe, nah, sorry guys, even in Europe, the manual transmission is dying. The reason being that people just generally bought vehicles with manual transmissions because they were cheaper. And when they're not cheaper, people don't buy them. Now, in my view, I don't think an enthusiast wants a fake clutch in their car. That's really just like adding fake CVT shifts that actually hurt the performance of the car because it feels more like a regular transmission. And it's just adding something else that can potentially break as well. Complexity that serves no real purpose. So basically what this is that there are no gears. It's a software simulation of a gearbox and a shifter. Honestly, this is kind of telling when it comes to Toyota and where they're currently at in terms of EVs. Toyota hasn't really figured out the fact that not all the rules of a car remain the same when you actually change the powertrain to such a fundamental shift as you do when you go from ICE to electric. Honestly, I think this is a solution to a problem that either we didn't know we had or just simply doesn't exist. But maybe I'm just being a Debbie Downer here. Maybe I'm just being negative because you all know how I feel about Toyota. I don't like the fact that they try and brainwash school children into believing electric vehicles are bad for the environment. That to me is just taking things one big step too far. This leads me to wonder, what will Toyota patent next? Horse and buggy? I mean, what else can you think of that could be as equally ridiculous as this? Let me know in the comment section below. The other thing I was thinking is maybe they'll make a vehicle with a fake fuel flap and a pipe for where the actual gas pump goes into the vehicle. This would enable people who love their gas cars to pretend to fill their car up with petrol, much in the same way that a kid does when he goes to a little playground and they have those fake petrol pumps. Well, they do at my playground anyway. My boys love to pretend to put petrol into their bicycles. Now, in my honest opinion, I think it does or can potentially make sense to have a gearbox in an EV, but only in performance cars with a lot of power where you want a high top speed. For example, the way that Porsche have used it in the Taycan, I think makes sense. But to be honest, it's still really not necessary, and it is still adding complexity and cost and something else that can break potentially in a vehicle where it's not necessary. Personally, I do actually quite enjoy driving a manual car, but if it doesn't achieve anything, and if the clutch pedal is fake, and if you know the shifts are actually fake because there's no real gearbox, then what's the point?